Welcome to the Calm Cockpit, where pilots of all levels can find high-performance tools, actionable strategies, and access to professionals who can help you fly smarter and stress less.
Today, we're joined by Jeffrey J.J. Madison, airline pilot and aviation author, for an in-depth discussion about smart pilots and the dumb things that we do in the name of flying.
We all want to avoid mistakes, but today we're going to kind of flip that conversation around and instead dive right into our mistakes. We're going to figure out those key ingredients for not only avoiding, but really how to bounce back from our inevitable human failings.
With JJ's help, we'll provide actionable strategies for overthinking, confirmation bias, mission pressure, and hesitancy. While we can't always avoid our mistakes, we can learn how to use them to build resiliency and safety.
The Calm Cockpit podcast starts now.
Onyx 1-2 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I'm Geeta Brown, midlife student pilot and licensed yoga and meditation educator with about 30 years of experience teaching high performers how to improve their lives, but without adding stress.
And I'm John Niehaus, professional pilot and flight instructor.
Today is a really fun conversation with pilot and author Jeffrey J.J. Madison. I first got his book, Yikes, 100 Smart Pilots and the Dumb Things They Did Yet Live to Tell About Them, back when it was released in November. And I had this book, I read about half of it, absolutely loved it, laughed at certain parts of it. And then when we got in touch with him for the podcast, I said, wait a minute, I have that book on my shelf. And it was really kind of a nice full circle moment for me. And I really can relate to this idea of mistakes and the fear of making mistakes but more importantly, how we bounce back for them. You know, as a classical musician, we are trained to not mess up. When the conductor points at you for your solo in Beethoven 6, everyone in the orchestra knows what it's supposed to sound like, and the whole audience knows what it's supposed to sound like, and you better hit that high G at the end and not go squeak instead, because everyone's going to know about it. But then when I kind of moved into being a music therapist and had to do a lot more improv, I started to kind of change that relationship a little bit and realize that mistakes can be an asset. Sometimes you can just pivot on a mistake and turn it into a cool discovery in the moment. Other times it's just like a learning opportunity. But I find I still struggle as a student pilot. If I make a mistake, I get hard on myself. And then my learning stops and I can get really derailed really quickly. So it's something I'm working on myself personally. That's why I really enjoyed this conversation. How do you do with it, John? Because now you're a professional. Your stakes are high. You got the fancy people in the back of the airplane. What's your relationship to messing up?
Yeah, I mean, we feel the same pressure as pilots as musicians, if not even more so. I mean, it's maybe not center stage in front of a large auditorium of people, but at the same time, you slam that landing down and everybody on that airplane knows that maybe you didn't do your best. So, you know, it can be very visible and makes you self-conscious. And of course, we go into simulator training anywhere from every 6 months to once a year. And it's easy to forget that training is where you're supposed to make mistakes.
Great
point.
That's
where you're supposed to learn. If everything was perfect, we wouldn't need training. And so I am also in that same boat where as I progress in my career, I'm becoming more and more okay with screwing up, especially in that particular environment, because you just need to remember that, well, okay, I just did something in the sim where I'm fully safe and protected, and I'm not going to do it now in the real airplane. So adjusting that mindset to, I'm going to take this experience with me the next time I touch a physical airplane, it's definitely helped. It's helped me improve and be a little bit less self-conscious and in the same boat, you know, not allow it to affect my performance.
I think especially for us GA pilots, there is that fear of messing up and doing something catastrophic that we can't recover from. But that fear itself then can cause mistakes that can become catastrophic. So it's such this, razor's edge we're dancing. And I can't really think of anybody better than JJ to shepherd us through this. I'm just going to give you his loose bio right now. Then you're going to hear the whole wonderful interview with him. At the end of that interview, John and I will meet back and just give those key, I think we have 2 or 3 really key takeaways that are really mindset changes on this whole idea of mistakes. So you can start putting some of this in action. But a little bit more about JJ, absolutely amazing background. So he's a Harvard educated flight instructor. He's a mentor pilot. He's an author. He's flown a lot of GA. And right now he's an airline pilot as well. He really is leading the charge for a more inclusive and resilient aviation industry. And you will hear all of this. His journey, though, to the flight deck didn't begin until he was 35. So if you're a little north of being a youngster, take hope, because he has an amazing story. He really dreamed of being a pilot since childhood, but it wasn't until he met a group of Black and female aviators, including 3 Tuskegee Airmen, that he really saw that an aviation career was possible for him. He then went on through his certificates and started flying professionally in the 2008 financial crisis. When all those pilots were laid off, he was laid off as well. But how about this? He kept his first class medical certificate current. He maintained his instructor credentials, and he stayed connected to aviation by writing these safety focused columns for General Aviation News and other aviation media as well. So for about 6 years, he had a column called Human Factors in General Aviation News, where he broke down real world pilot mistakes using NASA's aviation safety reporting system. And this is really where the book was born. But here's an interesting key to his story. His perseverance at maintaining his currency and all of his medical and all that paid off, because in 2023, at the age of 60, he was rehired as a commercial airline pilot. He could have taken something that could have seemed like a mistake and he turned it into gold. And now he's giving back. And you'll hear more about his book in the interview, but he's taking all of the proceeds from this book through his Victor Kilo Fund. And he's using that to create pathways into aviation for underrepresented youth and adults. And they, I believe, just gave out their first scholarship for flight training, which he felt like so great on that moment. So I think that's just a little sum up of the amazingness that is JJ.
Well, let's get to our talk with JJ, and we will check back in when the interview is complete. Jeffrey JJ Madison, welcome to the Calm Cockpit podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here.
Oh, we're so glad to have you. And of course, we're going to talk so much about your book, Yikes. But before we get there, I just wanted to get into a little bit more about you. I know we talked about your bio in the introduction, but I don't feel like that really gets us the sort of aura of you. So just as a quick kind of reference to our listeners, what initially drew you into aviation? And let's talk about sort of all the barriers, personal and external, that you had to overcome just to kind of be in this room with us.
Well, okay. So I always wanted to fly. My dream actually was to learn how to fly and then either own or build my own airplane. I used to build model airplanes as a kid. And I think my first frustrated moment was my twin brother and I got a Cox model airplane that actually flies, but it flew on a string. And so we didn't know how to do that. But my cousin, who is a couple of years older than us, was in the Civil Air Patrol, lived in New Jersey, came down one summer, that same summer, and we thought, well, he can show us how to fly. So we took it out to the parking lot of our local school, and he flew it a couple times, and then he promptly augured it into the ground, smashing it into a million bits. So that was my first attempt.
Womp, womp, womp. That's family for you. Come right in and crush that dream.
That's right. That's right. And then maybe a decade or so later, I was working at Black Entertainment Television Sports, and I knew I wanted to fly. I wanted to learn how to fly. And I was gonna. So I saved up a month's vacation all in one chunk, and I went out to Leesburg Airport in Virginia to learn how to fly. And the short answer is I got 22 hours of logbook time. The gentleman was a Part 61 freelance CFI who always kept my logbook and never let me solo. And I showed up one day at the airport, and he had closed his shop and walked away.
Oh, no.
without my, yeah. So
with your logbook,
my logbook.
Oh,
It's 22 hours that I'll never get back.
Every flight instructor listening to this right now just had like their heart like crushed. Like that's so horrible, so unethical. Wow.
Right. So again, naive, not knowing anybody in the business, not knowing how to fly, not having any mentors or anything. I was deeply crushed, and so I put it off for another like 15 years or so. And finally, I was a writer in Hollywood at the time. Had been grinding away for about 7 years, and I had tiny little hits. Meaning, you can make a living in Hollywood barely and never have anything ever produced, but still work on scripts and get paid for that. And that was going on. But it was such a grind. I thought to myself, I've got to do something different, or I'm just going to die. So I got into freelance magazine writing while I was trying to figure myself out, and through that, found out about the California Black Aviation Association. And that was the first time I'd actually ever seen folks that looked like me flying airplanes in large numbers. And that got me kind of excited about the concept of at least getting my license through the California Black Aviation Association, which is based in Compton, California, by the way. And through that, I met 3 really elderly Tuskegee airmen who were still flying. And when I kind of lamented and told my story, they said, "Come on, son, we'll take you on our wing, show you how it's done." And that's how I started to really take flying seriously. I got my fixed-wing private pilot license. They told me about Long Beach City College, which had, for $11.50 a credit, an aviation professional pilot degree that allowed me to get a second degree. I didn't think I was going to become a professional pilot at that moment. I just thought if I'm going to be an airplane pilot, I want to be the safest kind I can be. And so I want to be in as structured an environment as possible. That's what happened. And Steve King, who was the department head at Long Beach City College, really did a great job of having the right mix of classes and bringing professional pilots in to talk about the industry. And I went on to get my CFI and my multi, then was very fortunate to, at that time, get caught up in the biggest hiring boom of the American aviation in the early 21st century.
And how old were you when you first got hired by the airlines?
Yeah. When I first got hired by the airlines, I was 37 years old. Yeah. I didn't start flying until I was 32 because of what we talked about before. This not seeing it and having 2 sort of negative experiences that didn't, I didn't have the resilience or tenacity at that time to go, well, that's just, I could just put that behind me and keep going.
Right. Well, you also didn't have the right people in your life saying, come on, like you said, come on, son, we can do this. I think I saw a stat that something like 4% of pilots identify as Black. Is that correct? That's pretty dismal.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think, I think it's 5% of current airline pilots are African-American or Black. And then like 1% of them are female, Black females.
Wow.
Oh, yes. Add female onto it. And yes, even less.
It's interesting because we did a whole episode on the importance of mentorship and what that means to people. And that's huge. But I think one of the things that we've yet to talk about on this podcast, and I think this is an interesting point to kind of your story, is never underestimating the sort of importance of fleeting moments where it can be just that brief touch point of somebody you don't even know and you might never even see again. But that small interaction, that small act of kindness, that brief conversation can change the path of somebody you don't even know. And it's just kind of interesting to see how lives can be changed that way.
I agree with that. I think that it wasn't just that it was at that moment. It was that I was personally like psychologically ready. There had been a lot of, I'm a big believer in when I'm present and those little signs show up for no matter how fleeting, if I'm able to recognize that because I'm present, then really great things happen. And I really encourage that for people to get present. And this podcast, and I'm not blowing smoke, is really a great way for people in aviation to get present and allow fleeting moments like that to come and enrich their lives.
You happen to have written a really great book yourself that there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom and why I love your book so much, which is called Yikes, 100 Smart Pilots and the Dumb Things They Did Yet Lived to Tell About Them. is that it's not only your words, JJ, but it's also the words of our fellow pilots saying, here's where my mind wasn't clear. And that's some of the ones that we're focusing on today, really focus on that mindset and that clarity that you were just referencing. Here's where I wasn't clear. Here's what was distracting me. So we get the pilot's words, but then we also get your wisdom of all of your years as a writer, amazing Hollywood writer. Woo la la. I don't think we've ever had a Hollywood screenwriter on the podcast before. We got that, but we have those two coming together and really giving these takeaway lessons. And for all of our listeners, I really encourage them to get the book, because at the end of each little sort of mini lesson, there's questions for reflection. So you're not only getting a great read, a great book, but you're getting really a lesson in this sort of mindset mastery that you're talking about. So I think your book can be for some people that one moment in time where they hear something that changes the course of how they're going to conduct their flight operations.
Nice. And I that's kind of the goal of it. As a flight instructor, that was the goal. So Yikes, hardly the title that you would think that would be appropriate for the cockpit. The reality is, these are taken from the NASA reports. I analyze them in a fun and easily digestible way. And the great thing about the NASA reports is that the pilot, the ATC controller, the flight attendant, the AMT, they lived to tell the tale. And not just to tell the tale, but also give us their perspective on, as you said, their mindset, their lack of presence of mind or their presence of mind in that moment. And so that we can learn, we can basically virtually hangar fly and not have to suffer the same fate and become calmer in the cockpit, ideally, because we can say, oh, I read about that. This is that situation. I'm not going to fall for that trap, mister. In doing the research for the podcast, I was thinking there was one, maybe two that were really, I think, apropos, but really I found 7 chapters minimum that are really, really, I think, relevant. I was starting with, there's a spouse in my head, and the idea that you get distracted because of familial issues, right? Mm-hmm. Either it could be a spouse, it could be a coworker, it could be a friend, somebody you care about. That's taking up enough of your brain that it's affecting how you do your job. But really, I discovered that in doing the research, like I said, cognitive dissonance is one of the chapters. Hesitancy was another. Overthinking. Presence of mind is a great one, because that one really highlights how people have the presence of mind. So not every NASA report is a negative that was done. It's somebody who reported something that they did in the moment that actually saved the situation and what their thinking behind that was. So those are great. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, lying is a way to have a lot of distraction in the cockpit and not be clear and present for what you need to be doing to operate an aircraft. And then the last chapter in the book is the case for not flying. And we talk about like building the resiliency and the muscle, the fortitude to be able to be at peace with not going, to say, yeah, this is a no-go. Go to the restaurant and have a story about the restaurant instead of having a story about the wreck.
Yeah, we have to somehow be able to talk about this, and we have to be able to tell pilots that you're going to make mistakes. And I think that you put that on the cover of the book, smart pilots. Yeah, right. They made a mistake, but that doesn't mean they're bad at what they do. That doesn't mean that they're inadequate as a human being or as a pilot. They just had a bad day or they made a bad decision.
That's right.
And so I think it fits.
Yeah, thank you. That's intentional. I wanted to make it clear that a smart pilot makes mistakes, but then learns from those, mm-hmm. and that a smarter pilot reads about them so that they don't have to make the mistake to learn.
Right.
But yeah, because I learned to fly at 32. And so that was one thing I learned. Hey, I can fly at 32. I don't have to be young to be able to fly. That was a misconception I had. But the second thing I learned was I'm not a natural pilot. I have to work really hard. I have to practice all the time to be as good as I am. And I'm pretty good at being a pilot. I wasn't a Chuck Yeager. I'm never going to be that natural born pilot. So what that meant is I made mistakes along the way. And by the book and then me talking about myself with other people, telling them that I learned midlife and also that I'm not a natural born pilot, it gives them permission to make those mistakes. it's really important to learn to make mistakes, because the only way to build resiliency and tenacity to do the difficult things that we have to do to get any of our licenses, whether it's a private or an instrument, commercial, all the way up to ATP, is be willing to recognize that we make mistakes, we'll make a mistake, and then just get back up and do it again. And for the flight instructor, I would say, for the flight instructor to be able to demonstrate, to allow the person to make their mistake to a certain point, and then to be able to correct it, right? And for a flight instructor, it's really important to be able to see that a mistake is about to occur, and then to know how to fix it. And if you don't let somebody get to the point of maybe they're making a mistake, then as a flight instructor, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you never get to understand what a mistake looks like.
I feel that in my bones. Because I am exactly the same way. I love it. I would classify myself as pretty good at it, but I also had to work really, really hard. And I had some friends that were naturals. And it is so easy in this industry to compare yourself to somebody who like never failed a check ride, or never had a lesson that went bad, or what? Chandelles are easy. I'm sorry. No, they're not. And so like, it really is that lesson in picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and continuing to go. And again, back to your thought on the CFI, I still believe, and I think that natural pilots are wonderful CFIs as well. But in my case, like, I feel like I'm a better CFI because I did struggle a little bit, and I can see that in my students.
Are there, JJ, certain chapters in the book that I know you initially said like, oh, there'll be a couple that are kind of, fall under the theme of like this sort of like mental performance thing. Are there certain ones that are really, really resonating that you think, oh, if I could, kind of point this out, kind of summarize, and maybe just give us your top one that you would love for an aviator to hear and reflect upon?
Ooh, top one. Well, let's start with I think that cognitive dissonance is really, really good. So cognitive dissonance for me, each one of these, let me just be clear for the folks. Each one of these is based on human factors, which is a column that I wrote for General Aviation News for 6 years. And each one is between 1,000 and 1,500 words. So short. And each one I start with my own snafu, because the goal was to get people to see, okay, this guy made a mistake. And then I would transition it into a very specific topic group based upon what I searched in the NASAs. And cognitive dissonance was one that was really important to me, because I hate gumps. I know it's enormously popular, but I can't stand it. It doesn't work for me, because there is no other place in my life where I would ever say undercarriage. Okay. And so in the highest workload situation, right, where I'm supposed to be on top of my mental game, I have to remember the word undercarriage. I have to dredge it out from somewhere, and then remember that that's for me to check that my landing gear is down.
Right.
I can't. So instead of being in the flow when I do a gumps check, I end up mentally stalling. So that's cognitive dissonance for me. Yeah. Right? And I know that people, that blah, blah, and I get that, and that's okay. I recognize that, and I took the hit when I published the column. But the point that I was making is that if you have a cognitive dissonance moment on the flight deck or in the cockpit, that could lead to some real issues. And one of those in the chapter on cognitive dissonance was a young guy who was being instructed by an onshore final. The instructor pulled out the logbook and started filling out the logbook because the lesson had gone long, and he wanted to get out of the airplane as soon as they landed so he could get to the next lesson. So the flight instructor wasn't even present in the cockpit at that point. The student didn't have the courage, resilience, or tenacity at that point because of their lack of aviation maturity to say, hey, you need to put that away.
Yeah.
We're about to land the plane.
Yeah. I need you focused here. Yeah. Wow.
So as a result, he tried to answer the question while flying the plane, and as a result, missed his gumps check. And so they landed gear up. So the flight instructor ended up missing his next lesson anyway.
In trying to rush.
Right. And the point of the cognitive dissonance as it relates to calm cockpit is that this young person didn't have the presence of mind to have boundaries.
Right.
To raise those boundaries, and then to say, pardon me, I really can't focus on that right now.
Yeah.
We're 500 feet from the ground. I really need to land the airplane. And part of what becomes a calm cockpit is being able to erect boundaries. And sterile cockpit is something that came out of the NASA reports. And so at the professional level, anything below 10,000 feet is a sterile cockpit situation where all you talk about, the only conversation is related to the safety of flight. And one of the things that the NASA reports has done, and thankfully, I guess the column in a certain way, was to be able to bring the conversation about sterile cockpit to general aviation. And then combined with aeronautical decision-making, allow folks to have the conversation about, hey, this really is one of those times when it's really important for you. What tools can we help build for you as a young pilot, meaning, and I don't mean young as in age, but young as in experience, to feel comfortable telling your passenger or your flight instructor or even your DPE on the check ride when it's time for you to erect that boundary and tell them, hey, listen, I really need to make this altitude to land the plane right now. So can we just put that aside?
It's so hard when you're in general aviation and you're pre-solo. I was told that, hold up your hand if you want quiet, but now I have more experience. I'm comfortable doing it. But back then you sort of have a power differential. That's your CFI. You're the student. And even though I'm older than my CFI, it doesn't matter. I'm respecting you as, you're my teacher.
Right.
So yeah, he used to test me and would just start talking at random times until I finally caught on. Threw up the hand.
One of the things that I hold dear or just very highly are kind of just the ideas of different human factors, incidents, and how people overcame it or didn't. Because so much in aviation we learn from when people don't. It's unfortunate that that's the case, but it's true. And it's one of those things, and we've talked about it so many times in this podcast, the idea that we think that aviators and pilots are superheroes, that nothing bad ever happens to them. And if something bad happens, they just kind of push through it and, they do their flight and all they think about is their flying. And I think we all know that that's not true. We have bad things that happen to us. People pass away, people get divorced, people get sick, I think that it's really interesting to see how some of these stories are affected by that. And this podcast, again, comes back to the idea of how do we work through these things and how do we normalize the fact that these things do happen, and yet you're still having this expectation that you have to continue doing the mission, or in some extreme circumstances, you don't. And how do you make that choice? And so let's talk a little bit about some of these stories on what that means in this book and how we can learn some lessons from that.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things real quick. I'm going to try and back them up in order. The NTSB reports are notoriously popular, right? And there's a lot of, guts and gore, and then forensic science, and then it's rampant speculation, and then the final analysis. It's like a Law and Order episode. Mm-hmm. But the ASRS reports are no less glamorous. They are great. The only difference is in every case, nobody died. You didn't break an airplane, and it wasn't illegal. And the person who survived to tell the tale was remorseful and were able to give their conclusion. And some of those conclusions are hilarious. Some of them are way like 90 degrees from what you thought your thinking was on it. And that's why I'm glad that I glommed onto NASA reports to be an aviation safety reporter. But I'm also sad that more people don't do it. Right now, I think I'm the only person who does NASA reports that analyzes them for the general public. Flying is sometimes incredibly unforgiving. One of the things that we talk about is the impossible turn, right? And I've had two friends who have died attempting to do the impossible turn. One who actually proved that he could do it, did it several times for one of the aviation safety organizations out there, and then when it really happened to him and his co-pilot, they didn't make it. But the first time was a friend of mine in Hawthorne, California, who had his own airplane and did the classic thing, was running late to, the $100 pancake breakfast, had flown the night before, didn't fuel it because he'd come in late, didn't do a gas check, so didn't realize there was water in the tanks from condensation from being overnight and the temperature cooling and all that good stuff. I took off out of Hawthorne and at 600 feet lost his engine. And instead of just landing on Hawthorne Boulevard, which was right in front of him, I think he overthought it. I think he should have landed forward, but he overthought it, decided to try to turn back, and ended up augering in the Taco Bell parking lot. That was tough. because this was a good friend. This was in the California Black Aviation Association. And we were, the first emotion was just angry. Why do such a stupid thing that you know that you shouldn't do, and you've been taught all this time, that's not going to work. And so the way we had to deal with it was just really, everybody had to admit that they were just angry at this guy for a long time. He was a good friend, and now he's not a good friend anymore. He's a memory. So we were fortunate. I'm fortunate. I had that camaraderie. I had a group of people who all went through the same thing at the same time. And so we could kind of talk about it and get through it in our own particular way. I had a less exciting experience flying, and it's in the book. It's my story for overthinking, which is a chapter in the book, where flying back from, my wife and I were doing a flight in an old 172 together in Central Virginia, and coming back around dusk, my wife looked over and said, "Hey, is that red light supposed to be there?" And it turned out it was the red light because the alternator was going bad, right? So the electrical system. So very calmly, she looks at, we go through the book together, and we judge that we've got, we can turn off some of the radio, one of the radios. We don't need the lights because it's not quite dusk. The sun's setting, but we'll be able to get back to Warrenton just in time to land if everything goes well. And so, close the book. I look over, she's asleep. So that's cool. That means she's calm. And I feel good because she's sleeping. She's not stressing. We're about 30 minutes away. We've got the fuel. We've got the sunlight. We're going to make it. We got a tailwind. But as soon as I get to the airfield, right, I'm within 5 miles of it. All of a sudden, I overthink everything, and I declare an emergency, and I'm going to come in with a tailwind. I announced that on the CTAF because of an electrical problem. And so I'm fully aware of this is what I'm going to do. And if I'm bothering everybody else and just inconveniencing them, fine. Then a guy gets on the CTAF and he says, "Your airplane's flying. There's plenty of light. Why don't you just join the pattern with the rest of us and land?" And I went, in that moment, it broke whatever the overthinking cycle was in my head, and made me realize, duh, he's right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point, is in the overthinking part of this, that chapter, one of the things that they talk about, there's an example, there are two pilots on board, a man and a woman, a couple, they're married. They decided that the engine was stuck in full power. Okay. So they do all this kind of stuff. They spend like an hour trying to troubleshoot this, and they decide, all right, we're just going to land long. Okay. The prop is stuck full forward, the power is stuck full forward. We're just going to land long. And so, and we're going to bypass the longer airfields, but because we want to get back to our airfields so the mechanic can look at it. And they were so in their heads and overthinking the scenarios, they forgot this is just a power off landing. Just get in the pattern and shut the engine off. Right. Instead of doing a dead stick landing, they cut the power on short final. They got it down from 165 knots to 105 knots. You need 65 knots to land over the fence in a Cessna 172 RG. So suffices to say, they ran out of runway and they ended up on a road. That was the case of two pilots who were just overthinking the situation rather than recognizing we've trained for this, because maybe on the biennial flight review or the flight review now, you're always going to get a power off near the pattern. What are you going to do? They were not situationally aware. So instead of calm in the cockpit, they created chaos in the cockpit. And as a result, they ended up on a road.
It's interesting because that occurs at every level of what we do. I think we both know, being professional aviators, that even now, after years and years of experience, that overthinking creeps in on you. And the blessing for us that we have above somebody in a 172 or whatever is the crew environment. I am so thankful for a crew environment, because the number of times that I've talked to the pilot next to me and said, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think?" And they go, "I'm sorry, you want to do what?" It's such a blessing. And I have a similar but different story. In my case, I was flying a Lear 75. We were getting indications of low oil pressure, high oil temp.
Hot lap.
And we were looking in the checklist, and there were 3 scenarios in the checklist. And what we had, based on the indications that we were getting, didn't fit any of the 3. And so here I am with my first officer, who's a fairly new pilot to the Lear. I was actually training him on this flight, funny enough. And I remember looking at it going, okay, we don't fit any of these things. And of course, I'm flying the airplane, but I'm also thinking about, like, if I do something off the checklist, the lawyers are going to have a field day with this. If we all survive and everything's great, I'm a hero. If something happens and I deviate from this checklist, they're going to go, that's why it's his fault. And so there's that part of my brain that's now going off in this direction going, don't do something stupid. But at the same time, we don't fit into what this book is telling me to do.
Right.
And I distinctly remember, and this is a credit to the CRM that I've picked up along the way, whether it be from the university I graduated from or the airline that I had training in or any of the other places that I've been. I leaned over to him and said, look, we don't fit. This is what I'm thinking. We train for a single engine landing all the time, every 6 months. Worst case scenario, I shut this engine down. We land single engine and everything's good. And they tell me you didn't need to do that. Otherwise, if we don't shut it down and it turns into something that we weren't familiar with, it could be a fire, it could be a engine seizure. We could, toast the engine altogether. And like there's a price tag associated with that and paperwork. And none of us want to do any of those things. So I told him, I said, your job in the next minute and a half is to tell me a reason why I shouldn't shut this down. And he's like, I can't tell you that. So we did it. Now, the point to this story is that we continued on to our destination, single engine. When you're in a situation like that, you're falling back on your training. You're doing what you have been assessed to do so many times. And in the simulator, again, just like the airlines, what do you do when you're single engine? You shoot an approach, right? What did I do? The tower's like, hey, so you want to just take the visual to this runway? Oh, okay, sure. That'll get me on the ground faster. And, thankfully I had, my training hat on. So I told the guy with me, I said, look, we're single engine. We're going to come in on the visual. Your job now is to watch the rudders, because if I overturn, if I do anything, I don't want to be uncoordinated. We're going to get this thing on the ground. We had just flown 20 minutes to get to our destination with a single engine. And here I am worried about saving a minute and a half shooting a visual instead of a vectored approach. What am I doing? Everything was fine. It worked out, but I was completely thrown off by the fact that I'd never shot a visual single engine before. It was always an approach. Every 6 months you do all of these things. So, to your point, in the sense of, trying to get down and trying to declare an emergency and all these things, like your head goes to these interesting places, and it happens at all levels. And so, remembering that you have these things in your head that tell you the right decision, you just have to listen to them.
Yeah. It's great because the thing that was in my head was when we were approaching the field was okay, my wife's on board. If I kill her, she's going to kill me.
Right.
Kind of thing. No, it just snowballed. And the reality is at that moment, my CRM was the other pilot in the pattern.
Yeah.
My other crew member was the pilot in the pattern, waking me up to reality. So CRM isn't just at the pro level, right? That's the other thing that Yikes, the goal is to help get general aviation pilots to understand is CRM is all around you. Even if you're the only person in the plane, you've got somebody's on the ramp, somebody is in that FBO. If you've got flight following, you've got ATC. Even if you don't have flight following, you've got ATC, and you've got other pilots in the pattern, right? Everybody who is at that moment in that geographic space who is affiliated with aviation is now part of your team. The takeaway that I hope people get from that, it's exactly that. CRM, you're never really alone in the cockpit unless you choose to be, unless you don't have radios, unless you turn the radio off, or unless you turn your mind off. And so our goal is to open the mind and allow for CRM to happen. And the other thing you talked about is training. And so one of the things that I constantly go through in the book is the idea that these general aviation pilots, because I really focus on general aviation pilots in Yikes. I try not to keep the airliners and ATC to a minimum, except when they really would be helpful for GA pilots, is that these GA pilots were doing the things that they did either poorly or really well, all attributed it to training or lack of training. Recency or lack of recency, right? That's the great thing about training, is that training allows you to have calmness in the cockpit in moments of either abnormal situations like hot lop, high oil temp, low oil pressure, or a crisis like if that you actually had an uncontained engine failure.
Mm-hmm.
When I started flying solo and actually, was cut loose to like fly to like a class D, I was like, woo, going to New Bedford on my own. It's like 20 minutes away, but to me, it might as well have been Mars. It just it's so freeing. I think all pilots can relate to that feeling. You're like, I can just go over there. It's amazing. But when I finally started doing it and, would go from CTAF and then talking to ATC, I could feel that community. There's something so comforting about the chatter on the radio. I'm hearing Block Island and Fisher's Island and Bebezibidoo and all this. And it sort of was like, wow, there's a whole community of people, even up here while I'm buzzing along in my little bug smasher. Mm-hmm. And I've had people on the ramp looking out for me when they know I'm solo and telling me little tips and tricks. So I think GA pilots in particular can really benefit from curating a collection of people around them who they know personally who can check them, but then also know that there's people, strangers, who will be willing to help you. That if you're in an emergency situation, buzzing along, you don't have to make that decision to do the tailwind landing. Perhaps you could actually say, hey, here's the situation, key up the mic and see what someone else's opinion is. And it never occurred to me to run, and if I have time in an emergency scenario, to reach out to ATC or someone on the ground and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. It's not a dire emergency, but any other opinions, just to see? Why not? As long as I'm not clogging up the airway and I have, the mental capacity to do that, I think that's an interesting strategy. Reach out for the slap across the face. That's right. Am I about to be a bonehead? Can someone check me here?
That's right. And there's just a dovetail on that. What I love about that is that's exactly the right thing to do, right? You wouldn't want to do it in LAX. Probably don't want to do it in New York airspace. But but definitely, if you have to get on the mic because you have a problem, you're not bothering somebody.
Well, and it's the same issue of how many emergencies aren't declared as emergencies because the pilot doesn't want to inconvenience others or doesn't want the paperwork, which, guys, there isn't any. It happens all the time. And so to Geeta, for you, if it is something significant enough to be an emergency, clog that frequency all you want. Yeah. That's exactly what JJ said. That's what it's there for in an emergency. Everyone else takes a back seat.
That's right. And that is a great segue to one of the chapters in my book, Hesitancy. And it's all about not wanting to declare an emergency because, as you said, people don't want to do the paperwork, of which there is very little, if there is ever any. Mm-hmm. And two, they don't want to look weak. And the reality is declaring an emergency makes you actually stronger because now you got everybody's attention focused on you to help you solve that problem, right? Mm-hmm. And there's the old joke, if you're at a party and there's a pilot, how do you know the party's half over? He'll stop talking about himself and start talking about his airplane. It's not like pilots are introverts, right? So it's not like, I don't want to disturb anybody because I'm flying. That's really not part of our nature, generally speaking. But people suddenly get locked up about declaring an emergency. And so there's a couple of stories in the book about how ATC decided to declare the emergency for the pilot because of the situation. And then ATC then filed the NASA. And so that's how we got to learn about the situation. Declaring an emergency, there are two things to remember. One, if there's any paperwork, it's very little. Most of the time you don't. And two, you can always undeclare the emergency.
Ooh,
the situation is resolved. You can undeclare an emergency.
I guess that makes sense.
That gets rid of that black and white thinking. I think some of it, this is like my yoga therapy hat on. Some of it is the unwillingness to look at our stuff because we're afraid that, once we start looking at the darkness inside, it's going to get worse. It's the same thing. If I say, yeah, I'm sick, I'm about to throw up, it's going to make me throw up. Or if I say it's an emergency, like that has a psychological effect. I'm not going to be able to handle it. Whereas if I work on denial, I can just keep flying the plane and keep on with my confirmation bias that everything is okay. There's like a hesitancy for us to sort of admit that things have gone in a not helpful direction.
And I know this is true because I've been a part of a crew that declared and then undeclared. And also I know it's true because it's in a pilot did it in a NASA and then also ATC backed that up. That if you declare an emergency because you feel like there's a situation that requires a lot of help, coordination, and some clear airways, then that's what you'll get. But if you're able to resolve the situation and then continue the flight normally to your destination, or even to an alternate or diversion, if you undeclare, then what you've done is now you've relieved the burden of ARF, Airport Rescue Fire, to show up at your door when you land, relieve the burden of dispatch and ATC to assist, because you've got the situation back in hand.
Interesting.
It is funny. I hope, for all the aviators out there, I wish you a career of safe flying, and hopefully nothing bad ever happens to you. I will say, having been a pilot who's declared emergency multiple times for multiple different reasons, that first one's the hardest. Once you do the first one and you get down, and like in my case, I think the first one might have been the engine failure that I had, and we got to see some cool fire trucks and flashing lights and stuff, and the chief fighter came up, and somebody from the airport showed up at the door, and they said, "You good?" I said, "Yeah." And here I am, waiting for that mountain of paperwork, because nothing scares a pilot. Like, you can give us fires, you can give us depressurization, but don't give me a stack of paperwork. and he was just like, "You good?" I said, "Yeah, all right, have a good day." That's it.
Wait, what?
That's it. It's interesting how the brain will go, well, this is the safer option, but it's going to lead to more work tomorrow, so I'm not going to do that.
Right. Because don't say it out loud, but our pilots aren't inherently lazy.
Right. Well, and one of my really good friends, Gary Reeves, Gary GPS, guy in the pink shirt, Reeves, is a huge advocate declaring an emergency. And he wears his instructor hat on that all the time, and listening to him speak about it, it was one of those things where I was early enough in sort of my career at that point to go, that makes a lot of sense, because as a student pilot, you're just kind of afraid of it. Like we've already talked about, there's this gap of if I do this, it's real. And also I'm going to maybe get in trouble. Or if it's not an emergency and I declare an emergency thinking it is, somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong. Just kind of having that conversation and understanding, especially from what Gary says, it definitely helps kind of break the seal on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's like the decision to not go, right? Declaring an emergency in some people's minds is a sign of weakness. For others, having to decide not to go is a sign of weakness, right? Because we're taught, as you said, Geeta, at the beginning, that we're just able to handle it and just push through. We're press on and make it happen. But pilots aren't inherently built that way. We're built as human beings. And we make these mistakes, and then we tend to lean into ourselves, right? We don't lean against ourselves. So there are two chapters that talk about that. Lying is a big lean into yourself thing. Sadly, pilots have a habit of thinking that we're actually better than we are in most situations, based on past experience, regardless of the recency, right? And so with the decision not to go, right, that's really hard, because we are very much mission oriented, regardless of what kind of a person you are. But if you're a type A, B, or C, it doesn't matter. We all tend to be mission oriented. What you learn as a pro is you learn that abort and diversions and alternates are all part of the mission. But when you're coming up as a young pilot, as a new pilot, as a general aviation pilot, those sometimes get lost. They are part of the flight plan when you first learn about flight plans and cross-country navigation and stuff, but they tend to kind of go away the more experienced one becomes as a pilot. This is just my observation. I may be wrong, but what I have seen is that it becomes harder and harder for a person to say no to going. And even as professional pilots, because then as a professional pilot, we think, it's mission-oriented. And if you're 121 pilot, there's a lot of pressure to go, because you have passengers behind you. And if you're a 135 or 91 pilot, you got a tremendous amount of pressure to go, because you've got high net worth income people sitting in the back who are they're there for a reason, and it's not to sit. And so one of the tools that helps us, it's not in the book, that's my fault, maybe it'll be in the second, in the follow-up, but is the flight risk assessment tool, right? Because it helps give pilots the gumption, see what I did there, to be able to say, sorry, I can't go. I mean, this piece of paper, this interactive app that I'm using, the flight risk assessment tool, says we're in the deep yellow and the red. We can't go. I'd love to help you, but I can't go. Until we get the, sort of the tenacity, resilience, and the boundaries built up from experience and just self-awareness to be able to say, sorry, you can't go. And that's even saying, sorry, I can't go to the person in the mirror.
It's interesting. For as much as human beings want to consider ourselves unique, our experiences are so similar. And I've got 2 points to this. The first actually comes from the former board chair at NAFI. And I've told this story many times before, but it's one of the most sort of profound things I think I've ever heard. I was brand new at the National Association of Flight Instructors. I was working Sun and Fun, the fly-in convention down in Florida. And we had a member come up, and this member was talking to us about various emergency situations. We're kind of giving us some what ifs. And they were talking about, a departure, and like, I'm getting ready to go, and there's weather, and there's this, and there's this, and Bob, of course, in his cowboy hat, he stops the person mid conversation. Whoa, stop. And he goes, okay, do you have your checklist on you? Guy goes, yeah. I want you to look in your checklist. I want you to just peer in there and see if you can find me the emergency takeoff checklist. And the pilot doesn't even think about it. He goes in there, starts flipping pages, and he's like, emergency landing. No, there's no emergency checklist. And Bob goes, you're darn right there isn't. And he's like, there is nothing so important that you've got to get off the ground right now based off of any of those circumstances that you're telling me about.
Yeah.
Stay on the ground.
Yeah.
And like that was probably 15 years ago now. And it has stuck with me ever since. And again, so many of these things that we talk about, it doesn't matter whether you're in a 172 or a 777, like it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, a few years after that, again, I was flying Learjets. I was brand new to the 135 charter company, and the pressure is absolutely real. When you're sitting on the ground and you're in a classroom and you're learning CRM and you're like, here's the NASA report of this guy who did this thing. And you're like, that was stupid. Why? I'm never going to do that. Like, I'm just going to tell the passengers I'm not going to go. Well, when those passengers are staring you in the face and they're like, I've got a meeting in 20 minutes, we got to get out of here. And you're looking at a line of thunderstorms, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yep.
And I remember, and I'll try to keep this short, but I think we were coming out of Augusta, and Augusta during the Masters, the weather is always terrible.
Yep.
And we had already delayed the flight. We had like 6 passengers. They needed to get back that night, and there was just thunderstorms everywhere. I was flying with the assistant chief pilot to the company I was working for, a very talented, very smart guy. And I was brand new, and we were looking at the weather, and he goes, I think there's a gap in the weather here. Let's go. And of course I'm sitting there going, I don't really want to do this. And he's like, let's just load up. We'll keep an eye on it. Everything will be fine. If we decide to turn around, we just won't go. Okay. So we load up, holding short of the runway, and actually we're taxiing toward the hold short line. And I said, Brian, are you sure about this? And like that in my head, I'm like, I don't want to do this. But the words that came out were, are you sure? Just hoping that he's going to go, yeah, we shouldn't do this. He looked at me and he goes, yeah, I think it'll be fine. Holding short of the runway, he looks at me and he had the sort of CRM mind frame of, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
And I swear to you, if you've ever seen The Wonder Years, this is that moment in The Wonder Years where the video pauses and the narrator comes up and goes, and this is when the first officer knew they were going to die today. Because I went, I think it'll be fine. We took off into essentially just a thunderstorm. Severe turbulence. We were getting bounced around to 40,000 feet. At one point, they were trying to make us turn, and we both said, all we can do is go straight. It should be in this book. It's one of those moments where we survived, but boy, that was dumb. Yeah. Like, we shouldn't have done that. Yeah. And that pressure can get the best of you if you really aren't being honest with yourself.
We make the case in Yikes. You've actually helped me in this moment. I wrote the book thinking people are going to read this and they're going to come away smarter pilots. But really, I wrote the book. It's going to be out there. It's there for pilots to look at and say inwardly, I would never do that. And then I have to recognize and be willing that they may still go out and do it. I'm just exposing you. What's the phrase here? I can bring a horse to water. I can't make a drink. But at least it's out there, right?
Yeah.
And I really want to thank you for sharing that story, because that story is frightening and way too common, right?
Yeah. How has writing this book and reading all these, has it changed your approach to you still fly GA, or is it a change your approach for when you're flying professionally? Has there been little, shifts in your psyche because of so much exposure to all of this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I did this for 6 years, almost over 75 columns, and I had to pour through a few thousand of these because not every NASA is tantalizing, right? And not every NASA is applicable. So I usually had to go through 12 or 20 before I got 3 or 5 that were good enough and applicable. I think what it helped me do is it definitely broadened my mind and helped me become myself more and become a little more self-aware. And do I still make mistakes? Absolutely. But it really, really made me feel also more comfortable knowing that I wasn't the only one out there, being a doofus sometimes in the cockpit, because there's so many. They hit 1 million NASAs in 2012, I think. So, and they're doing they're something like 95,000 per year being filed. So take that to heart. At this point, there are probably 2 million NASAs being filed. That means a lot of people are admitting to mistakes, which means there's a lot of good data out there that the human factors behind flying, even though people are making mistakes, we're still surviving. We're still becoming better pilots as a result of making those mistakes and learning from those mistakes. I do still fly GA now that I'm back at the airlines. I don't fly as much because that schedule takes it up a lot. But yeah.
So having poured over all of these NASA reports and looking at not just the mistakes that people have made, but I think the takeaway in some of these is, well, how did they fix it? So they're admitting to a mistake, but they survived. So how did they overcome it? How did they fix it, push past it, whatever words you want to use? One of the things that we pride ourselves on in this podcast is kind of that like actual takeaways. Like we want to bring these conversations to light. We want to talk about them, but we also want to give people something to learn and put into their toolbox and move past. And so like after having poured over these and having created the book and, given your commentary on some of these, what are some of the kind of common traits or tips, tricks, whatever that sounds like, we give to some of our listeners to say, like, here are the things to look out for, but here's how to make yourself better because of these stories?
I think the number one takeaway from almost all of the NASA reports that I analyzed and researched over the years is that everybody laughed at themselves in hindsight. Everybody realized what a dope they were. And we're happy to tell you. And I think as long as people keep their sense of humor about themselves and are certainly self-deprecating in some way, then that's the thing psychologically that keeps human beings open to learning, right? My experience has been once I've lost my sense of humor about a situation, I stop learning. And
Totally.
That's one of the reasons why I love reading NASA reports over NTSB reports. NTSB reports aren't funny. NTSB reports are stark and sad and grim. You talked earlier about this, John, that, human beings like to think we're unique individuals, but the reality is we're all patterned. We're all creatures of habits. Aviation is a series of patterns. Accidents are a series of patterns. Incidents that you see in NASA, they're all a series of patterns. They all follow specific things. There might be 25 or 50 different patterns, but they're all there to be seen. And one of the patterns of behavior, if learning and growing as a human being, is being able to not take oneself too seriously. And that's what I love about NASA reports, because the NASA reports at the end of the day are just flat out funny. One guy's takeaway after he had to ditch his Cessna 310 after falling asleep and running out of fuel over the Gulf and being able to make him back to the Florida shore before having to ditch and then having to float for 20 minutes on a seat cushion was, I need to learn how to swim.
Oh, Lord.
The second takeaway was maybe I shouldn't drive all night, stay up all day, and then try and fly all night. Maybe fatigue was a factor, right?
Maybe.
But the bottom line is, and then another guy who was a really seasoned CFI took a 150 with a friend who was a VFR only 150. The friend wanted to buy a 152 that was somewhere, 100 or so miles away on the other side of some weather. They decided they can do this, and the VFR pilot, just said, okay, fine, because I'm flying with a CFII who's really experienced. And even though it was a VFR only plane and they had their portable with them, they got into a whole mess. You got to read the book to find out what the mess is they got to. But at the end of the day, the CFII's NASA conclusion was, I have never done anything so stupid in my life. And we did it just because we wanted to see a plane that other people wanted to buy, and we wanted to get to it first. So again, having the self-awareness at the end of the writing, the NASA report, and just before hitting the submit button, for all of these pilots, these AMTs, the ATC, and flight attendants to be able to kind of laugh at themselves and point out the foible, and then deliver to us the lesson. It's just such a delight. And I really am grateful for people who participate in NASA reports. And I'm so appreciative of people who are willing to be vulnerable in the moment for the sake of others, and specifically for the sake of general aviation community, to make us humbler, safer, and stronger.
This notion of humor, I love this. I did humor is sort of like the key takeaway. I did a project once where I was interviewing masters across a bunch of different fields to find like one of the key defining characteristics of experts in martial arts, in music, in education, et cetera, et cetera. It was great. I got to meet all these really cool people and do these interviews. One of the number one things, though, that I noticed about all of them was their sense of humor about themselves, about whatever craft they were offering, whether it was, writing or teaching or music or yoga, whatever. They were all also had a sense of humor, didn't take it too seriously. And they all had this lightness about them. And I would notice all of them working, particularly the educators, with their students. When their students got really serious and all involved, but they would just crack a little joke and the student would laugh, and it was like the tension would dissipate and then the learning would occur and things could move forward. I think as aviators, we are so hard on ourselves. That's why we're good, because we're hard and we're tough. And I'm maybe talking about myself, but not that I'm good, but that I am hard on myself. But I catch my instructor doing that a lot with me, just little moments of humor that break up that being too hard on ourselves. So I love this. Laugh more. Don't take yourself so seriously. And that actually improves your outcomes in your performance. Doesn't all have to be just, straight laced with the hat on and the tie way up, choking off the neck. Lighten up is actually a sign of high intelligence.
The thing to remember, though, is just because you don't take yourself seriously doesn't mean you're not taking your craft seriously.
Exactly.
Very true. Some people mistake that, right? They conflate that. And this is where the three of us are here to let you know, is that you can take yourself unseriously while still taking your craft very seriously.
Absolutely. Exactly.
It's going to help you in the long run. I think levity is important, and just knowing when it's appropriate and when it's not. And that's a sign of maturity as well. And that's, again, what the NASA report submitters, the reporters, actually are showing you, right? That they're showing you that the maturity they displayed by being vulnerable in talking about the situation, putting it on paper, and then being able to have a conclusion that was either funny, made fun of themselves, or made light of the situation. Just to get back to the very beginning of these, back in 1975, when NASA reports were first introduced to the flying public, they were only with the FAA. And for the first 6 months, 0 NASA reports were filed. They were called any mouse or anonymous reports. And ALPA and the FAA realized, or rather ALPA told the FAA, if you want pilots to do this, you need to send this to a third party. So NASA Ames research facility was already doing human factor stuff. Linda Connell, I think, was running that at the time. And so they approached NASA, and so after some negotiation, that's when they set up NASA reports as they are now, the Aviation Safety Reporting System. If you submit a report to NASA within 10 days of the incident, so that is kind of key, either 10 days of the incident or being made aware of the incident. It wasn't illegal, you didn't do it on purpose, you didn't kill anybody to break a plane, you express remorse. It goes to NASA, they de-identify it, so anonymize it, and then they make it available. Then suddenly the NASA reports took off. They were reintroduced in 1976 and they took off. The vulnerability
it also provides some protection for the pilots too.
That's right. It's a get out of jail free card if you adhere to all of those. And the last one that I sometimes forget is you can't have had an incident or a violation within the previous 5 years for the same thing. And they are limitless.
I see Yikes 2, Yikes 3, Yikes 4, Yikes 5. You're going to have a whole series of these. In the next 20 years, it'll just be a whole shelf in my library.
Yikes again.
Now, JJ, while we start to wind this down a little bit, are there any other points or stories that we have missed that you want to share about the book? And of course, tell us a little bit about the really important charity behind the sales and the proceeds of the book as well.
I think if I told you more, of course, I could sit here all day and regale you with stories and bore you to tears. But if you don't buy then the charity, the whole purpose behind it's not really going to work. So I encourage you to buy it. And this is the reason. I did human factors for general aviation. And then I wrote Yikes specifically to create flight scholarships, flight training scholarships, and other scholarships for under-resourced Civil Air Patrol squadrons, flight schools, and STEM groups. And it all got started because back like 2019, 2020, I saw a video article by Ron Mott, former NBC reporter and a private pilot himself, about Eagle Flight Squadron, Inc. in East Orange, New Jersey. And it was started by Reverend Russell White, who is a pastor but also a truant officer. You know, the guy who, if you're skipping school, shows up next to you and taps you on the shoulder and says, come with me, son. So he was out one day doing his job, and he came across 5 high schoolers who were skipping school, and he said, I got 2 choices for you. I can take you back to the principal's office and you will get suspended, or I can take you flying this weekend with your parents' permission over East Orange, New Jersey, get a new perspective on life. And they were like, man, you can't fly. You're black. So he said, well, listen, I can. I'm in the Air National Guard. And if you want proof, let's get your parents' permission to do it. So they did it. And he saw that he'd blown their minds and realized, like, I can't just blow kids' minds one time. I have to get my act together and do something to help them. So he started a flight school in the basement of his church. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is really cool. What can I do to help? And it took a couple of days because I was thinking, I can give him a few dollars. We'll see what I can do. Maybe volunteer some time. And then it hit me. Wait, I've got these columns. I can take the best of those columns and I can write a book. Yikes! 100 smart pilots and the dumb things they did, yet live to tell about it. And have all the proceeds from the sales go toward perhaps flight training scholarships for them, or a big one was maybe even get them a Redbird full motion flight simulator. And if I sold more than a few, then maybe I could expand that to other people as well, other under-resourced flight schools, Civil Air Patrol squadrons and STEM groups, anywhere, rural, urban, or suburban. And so that's what started it. And I started the whole process. I got it together last year in 2024 and started Victor Kilo Fund with my wife. And it's a nonprofit aerospace education foundation. And we call it Victor Kilo Fund because Victor Kilo is Greek for 1,000 victories. And anytime you do something that's meaningful in your life, it usually takes about 1,000 little victories to get there, right? So that's why we named it that. And we started selling the book in late, I guess November is when you picked up your copy. So thank you for being one.
You're welcome.
And we've been selling it ever since. And back in, as of June 2025, so June 14, 2025, we called Eagle Flight in late May and told them, listen, we've got enough sales that we'd like to present you all with a $5,000 flight training scholarship. And they said, wow. Okay. So on June 14th, while they were celebrating their 50th anniversary as a nonprofit flight school, we went up to Newark, New Jersey and presented Eagle Flight Squadron, Inc., our very first $5,000 flight training scholarship to them. And it was really just full circle moment for me. And it was emotional in ways I cannot describe. I've never had such a nice feeling.
And it's going right into that left seat with those young aviators who are hopping in planes and flying. I mean, it just continues on and on. What an amazing mission for a book. I mean, they say I'm going to get more spiritual. Writers have this saying, every book has its own karma, which just means, like you said earlier, once you write the book, you may have ideas for what it's going to do, but you send it out there in the world and it does whatever it's going to do based on the people that read it. Yeah. And I would hope and encourage everyone, don't buy it used, buy it real and fresh and hot off the press. So the money goes to the scholarships because you're not only getting a great book and a great read and learning something, but you're also supporting someone to get into that left seat. And we all know what a precious experience that is. So I commend you for giving so freely of your time, talent, and treasure to this book. It's really a gift to the whole aviation community all the way around.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you. That's really special. And I really appreciate that from you.
You're welcome.
The goal is, so you can get the book at yikesthebook.com, yikesthebook.com. It's also available as a Kindle version and an Audible version on Amazon. If you just Google 100 Smart Pilots Amazon, it'll come up. But if you'd like a signed copy, yikesthebook.com. We'd be happy to sign it and inscribe it to you as well. I have an audacious goal. When we sell 1 million books, we'll be able to fund between $5 and $10 million worth of flight training or AMT training or ATC training, scholarships for, up to between 5 and 10,000 people. So we're really excited about the prospect. And even if we don't get there, we're already helping people. And that's that's just the goal. I'm doing that because those 3 Tuskegee Airmen and then later on 2 African-American astronauts helped mentor me as well. And I thought, man, my heart is full with the gratitude from these folks taking time to help get me where I want to be to help achieve a goal. And so because they did that for me, I've chosen to do that as many times as possible for whoever I can.
Beautiful. We will include links to all of that in the show notes.
JJ, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about all of this. We as with so many of our guests, we could do another hour and a half of this. And, the things that you have mentioned are so insightful. And I think they're going to help a lot of people and, of course, our listeners. So listeners, don't forget, yikesthebook.com. And JJ, we really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Geeta. It's a high honor and a distinct pleasure. And I'm so glad you all are doing this podcast because you're doing the same thing that I'm trying to do, which is to bring calmness and situational awareness to the cockpit.
What a super fun conversation. And what I loved about it, it was super deep. We covered a lot of really heavy stuff, but it never felt like it got too esoteric or too theoretical. Because like a lot of times that human factors stuff gets like really tangled and what we should do, what we shouldn't have done, or how that pilot messed up here or there. But I found across all fields that like those greatest masters, they tend to focus on simple solutions and keeping things light because it keeps things moving forward. And I feel like just the way JJ is, it kind of feels like he's a great example of that humor and lightheartedness only reveals like a mastery and a seriousness of the topic.
So let's break down some of the key takeaways so you guys listening can start to decide what you want to put to action today. And JJ's key takeaway in all of this, and I'll make sure that I read this correctly so that you guys have his exact words here, but everybody laughs at themselves in hindsight. He says they realize what a dope they were in the moment. As long as we keep a sense of humor, this is the psychological thing that keeps humans open to learning. One of the patterns of learning and growing is to not take ourselves too seriously. Just because you don't take yourself seriously doesn't mean you don't take your craft seriously. So it's so important to be able to laugh at yourself or laugh at your actions as long as nobody was hurt, as long as nothing was damaged. Whew, boy, that didn't go well. Let's see what we can do better moving forward. And I think that doing that, just as he says, it doesn't mean that you're not a professional. It doesn't mean that you don't realize that, wow, that wasn't great. It just means that you're able to move on and not focus on allowing yourself to fall behind the airplane, especially in a moment where maybe things aren't done yet. You're not done until you pull into the chocks. So yeah, just staying ahead, staying with it, regardless of what happens is just so important.
It can really snowball. I mean, that's the way my brain works. If I start to perseverate on something I just did wrong, then I'm focused on that. And then it can snowball because then I make another mistake. And before you know it, it's like the whole situation is just derailed. And there's something really powerful about being able to catch ourselves in that cause and effect moment. So we have a cause, which is like we make a mistake. If the effect then is that then we start with the self-doubt and, self-criticism and all of that, that's not a helpful road when you're flying an aircraft or you're on short final. But if we can break that with just a moment in between the cause and effect, with laughter or a little bit of humor, or even just the smallest little term like yeehaw or woof or whoopsie, and just kind of shake it off, that's breaking that cycle, which then can lead to an even more adverse outcome or just make you like a big old cranky pants to be around. I mean, a lot of times back in college, people were like, would you lighten up? I'm like, I can't lighten up. I must get it correct. That perfectionist kind of thing is not a fun colleague to be around. It can really like dampen down, I think, that like crew resource management. So there's times to be lighthearted, even if it's in your own mind. You don't always have to show it to other people. you can lighten up internally, and that can go a long way. That was his key takeaway. He also has, we covered so many of these, right? Like the things you want to sort of do in your life to have this resiliency, bouncing back from mistakes, and that he really found in those reports. So having presence of mind and self-awareness, understanding your own tells for having issues, having that resiliency and tenacity, finding mentorship and reading these reports as a form of mentorship, having your effective crew resource management. He talked about making sure that you're keeping up with your training. One that I loved was his willingness to declare and undeclare an emergency. I mean, what else didn't he cover? He covered community support, and he also mentioned that flight risk assessment tool as a way of giving yourself that sort of checklist out for making better decisions. One of the other, though, key ones, besides this having this lighthearted sense of humor, one of his key takeaways that he said he learned from all these reports is learning from mistakes. And here's his quote: "Smart pilots make mistakes, but they learn from those. A smarter pilot reads about them so they don't have to make the mistakes to learn." And I love his point that these NASA reports are valuable for this because they provide insights into pilots' mindsets and how they navigated incidents, and they allow others to learn without experiencing the actual event. What's that thing, right? Like there's pilots, we love flying, or we love talking about flying. I think we also like reading about flying too. It's a form of talking, right? It gets our brains going. And his book, if for those of you who haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's humorous and lighthearted. And at the end of every chapter, he actually has like 2 or 3 questions to prompt you to think a little more deeply about it. So it's a really great like continuing ed resource as well. I think that could be a good call to action. Buy the book. Buy the book. Actually, buy several books. Don't just buy just one, because all the funds are going to a scholarship to help someone else fly. What could be better?
I think so too. And it is yikesthebook.com if you're interested. Buy it directly from the source. And if I may say so myself in somewhat of a self-serving way. I mean, I think this is why these podcasts are important too. You can read about these stories, but you also, with us or any other podcast out there, aviation wise, I mean, the story, the verbal story of here's what happened to me is very similar to the usage of these NASA reports and reading what happened. We all like to have our war stories, but I think that in each one of those is a little bit of kernel of knowledge that can help prevent the next person from maybe making the same mistakes that we did.
Along those lines, maybe write a NASA report as well. But if you are finding this show useful, it helps us out a lot too. If you leave that 5-star review, not only helps us, but I think it helps other people to find the show. It's kind of like the word of mouth thing. Just especially if you're an Apple Podcast, just hit 5 stars. If you have a little time to write a few notes in there as well for an actual review, that's great. But we'd really, really appreciate it. It helps other people to find the show, and a rising tide carries all ships.
And so if you have any stories yourself or want to share any ideas that you want to have for the podcast, please reach out to us. We're on all of the social media accounts, Calm Cockpit Podcast. And you can even email us at calmcockpit@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. And of course, the more ideas you have, the more episodes we can create. So please reach out. And I guess with that, fly smarter.
And stress less.
Airbus Air 1 departure is Airbus 321, traffic holding crossing runway 33 left, 3 lane.